Give me that phone right now! You are endangering everyone! Get away from me! No! Help me! Give me the phone now! No! No! Get away from me! She's aggressive! I'm being assaulted!
Hey! Leave him alone!
She assaulted me!
Stop pulling on him!
Boots, get your bags and get out of my cabin now. Before I have you removed in handcuffs. The woman in seat 2 Alpha did not move. Boots. She sat with her hands folded on the tray table, a plain silver watch on her left wrist, and she looked up at the flight attendant standing over her, the way a person looks up at weather. They have already decided not to be afraid of. Boots. 31 rows behind her, nobody breathed. A businessman in row 1 lowered his newspaper an inch, then raised it again. Boots. The woman 2 seats over pretended to read the safety card she had already read twice. Rewind 6 hours. Boots. 6 hours before that, Naomi Carter stood in the kitchen of a brick 2-bedroom rental off Tuckasegee Road in Charlotte, North Carolina, pressing a white uniform blouse she had already worn for 4 years, in a life that had ended 16 years ago and started over from a folding table at a Waffle House on Wilkinson Boulevard. Boots. She was 26 then. She smelled like burnt coffee and jet fuel most days, and she loved it, the strange, sour perfume of an airport before 6 in the morning, because it meant she had somewhere to be and something to give. Boots. She believed, the way only young people fully believe things, that if she gave enough of herself to the job would eventually give something back. Boots. It didn't. On a Thursday in April, a man in first class accused her of taking a gold watch from the overhead bin above seat 3C. Boots. He was loud about it the way men who have never once doubted themselves are loud about things. Naomi denied it, calmly, twice. Boots. The watch turned up 4 hours later, in the inside pocket of his own suit jacket, dropped there, and forgotten the way small expensive things get forgotten by men who have too many of them. Boots. By then, it did not matter. The head flight attendant working that cabin, a woman named Deborah Voss, had already written a signed statement swearing she had personally witnessed Naomi Carter lift the watch and slide it into her apron pocket. Boots. There was no hearing, there was no appeal. Palmetto Air terminated her in 41 hours, and not one person on that crew, not one, said a word in her defense. Boots. Naomi carried a cardboard box with 4 years of her life in it, out through the employee exit at Piedmont International Airport, past the break room where she used to keep a photo of her father taped inside her locker, and she did not cry until she got to the parking deck. And then she cried for exactly as long as it took to find her car, and then she stopped, because crying was not going to pay rent. Boots. Most people at that point disappear. They take the smaller job. They stop telling the story at parties. Naomi did not disappear. Boots. She sued Palmetto Air for wrongful termination, and after 11 months and legal fees that ate most of it alive, she walked away with $92,500 and a lawyer who told her, not unkindly, that this was as good as it was going to get. Boots. She used that money on tuition. She enrolled in an aviation management program at a small business school outside Atlanta, worked 2 jobs while she did it, graduated at the top of a class of 41, and took a junior consulting position with a regional carrier that folded within a year of hiring her. Boots. Then another carrier, then another. By 34, she had her own advisory firm, 4 employees, and a rented office above a dry cleaner in Fayetteville, negotiating fleet leases and route contracts for airlines too small to have their own in-house teams. Boots. By 38, when Palmetto Air filed for bankruptcy protection and its assets went up for auction, Naomi Carter made a phone call that changed the rest of her life. Boots. She put in $11.4 million of her own money, brought together a group of 9 private investors, and bought the airline at auction for a sum the trade press called, at the time, a reckless gamble by a woman nobody in the industry had heard of. Boots. She stripped the fleet down to 22 aircraft, renamed the company Ironwood Airlines, rebuilt the safety and service standards from the ground up, and kept exactly one thing from the old company: the Charlotte to Chicago route, the same route she had once worked coffee carts and cleared tray tables on at 4 in the morning. Boots. Today, Ironwood Airlines flew 51 domestic routes with a fleet of 68 aircraft. The company was valued at just over $1.1 billion, and Naomi Carter owned 54% of it outright. Boots. Almost nobody outside the boardroom had ever seen her face. She had turned down every television interview for 6 years running. Boots. She ran daily operations through her chief operating officer, Renee Sadler, and a 9-member board, and when she traveled, she booked under her middle initials, N. Boots, EC, and she dressed the way she had always dressed, plain, careful, unremarkable on purpose. This is the part you should pay attention to, because it comes back. Boots. Her father, Elijah Carter, had worked as a night janitor at Piedmont International Airport for 29 years. Boots. He mopped the floors of Terminal C every evening from 6 to 2 in the morning, and in 29 years, he never once sat in a first-class seat, never once flew anywhere, because airport workers who spend their whole lives inside a building somehow never think to leave it. Boots. He had a cheap Timex watch with a cracked crystal face, a gift from Naomi's mother in 1988, and when he died 3 years ago of a heart that had simply worked too hard for too long, Naomi took that watch off his wrist herself at the funeral home and put it on her own. Boots. She wore it on every single flight, not the Rolex her jewelry could have afforded, his watch. $12 new in 1988. Boots. Priceless now. This morning she stood at gate B14 in Piedmont International, wearing a plain oatmeal-colored blouse, gray trousers, and flat leather shoes, with a small scuff on the left toe she had never bothered to fix. Boots. No jewelry except her father's watch. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass without a flicker of interest. Seat 2A, first class, Ironwood Flight 212 to Chicago O'Hare. Boots. She had picked this exact flight for a reason. In 18 days, Ironwood Airlines was set to close a $2.6 billion merger with Union Sky Airlines, a deal that would make the combined company the 4th largest domestic carrier in the country overnight. Boots. Union Sky's chief executive, a careful, sharp-eyed man named Marcus Whitfield, was seated in row 3 of this exact flight with 2 of his senior vice presidents, flying to Chicago for a final round of pre-signing meetings. Boots. Naomi had arranged the seating herself, quietly, through her assistant, without telling Whitfield why. She wanted him to experience Ironwood's cabin the way any ordinary passenger would. Boots. Unfiltered, unwarned. She caught his eye once as she boarded. He gave her the faintest nod, the nod of a man who already knew exactly who she was and understood without being told that today was not the day to say so out loud. Boots. The cabin door closed. The safety briefing played over the speakers in a recorded voice that was not Naomi's, though the words on the last slide of the safety card, the ones she had personally insisted be added 8 months ago, were hers. Boots. Every passenger deserves to feel safe in this cabin. Then the curtain between first class and the galley swept back, and Deborah Voss stepped into the aisle, and something in Naomi's chest went very still, very cold, and very quiet. Boots. She recognized her instantly. The same sharp cheekbones, the same thin, appraising mouth. 16 years older now, silver threaded through what used to be a severe platinum blonde, but unmistakably the same woman who had signed her name to a lie and ended a 26-year-old's career without once looking her in the eye while she did it. Boots. Voss had transferred over when Palmetto became Ironwood, one of hundreds of employees absorbed in the acquisition, and somehow, through every restructuring, every new policy rollout, every background review Naomi's own human resources department had run, she had survived. Boots. She wore the standard Ironwood Navy uniform, but she had made small unauthorized adjustments to it over the years that nobody had ever bothered to correct. A silk scarf from a European fashion house in place of the standard company tie, pearl earrings the size of chickpeas, a silver Rolex on her left wrist that cost more than most of her passengers' monthly rent, and a cloud of perfume so thick it arrived in the cabin, roughly 4 seconds before she did. Boots. She did not recognize Naomi Carter. 16 years in a plain blouse had made her invisible, in exactly the way Voss had always found people invisible. Boots. She only saw a black woman in a first-class seat who, in her private and confident judgment, did not belong there. Boots. She skipped seat 2 Alpha entirely on the beverage pass. The man in 1A got a warm towel and a smile. Boots. The couple in 1C clinked champagne flutes and laughed about something. The woman in 2B received a second cocktail napkin before Naomi had received anything at all. Boots. Naomi noted the time on her father's watch. 10:14 in the morning. She said nothing. She had learned in 16 years of building something from nothing that the first insult is rarely the one worth spending your voice on. Boots. It is the third one. the one that reveals the pattern that matters. She pressed the call button. Voss appeared 31 seconds later, and she did not smile. And she did not lean down the way flight attendants are trained to lean down, at eye level, welcoming. Boots. She stood at the edge of the row, with one hand cocked on her hip, and her chin came up half an inch, the way a person's chin comes up, when they have already decided the conversation is beneath them. Boots. What do you need, she said. Not a question. A dare. I'd like some water, please, Naomi said. Voss looked at the call button like it had personally offended her. Boots. Then at Naomi. Then, slowly, deliberately, down at the flat leather shoes with the scuffed toe. Her upper lip moved, just barely, the way a person's lip moves when they have smelled something they consider beneath them. Boots. Water's complimentary in economy, she said. You're in the wrong cabin, sweetheart. I'm in seat 2A. This is my assigned seat. Boots. Assigned by who? Voss tilted her head, the pearl earrings swinging. Because I have worked this exact cabin for 14 years, and I know precisely what a first-class passenger looks like. Boots. And honey, this isn't it. The woman in 2B heard every word of it. She turned a page of her magazine faster than the sentence she was reading required. Boots. Naomi kept her voice level, the way she had learned, over 16 years of boardrooms full of men who talked over her, to keep her voice level. Boots. My boarding pass says 2A. I'd like some water, please. Voss extended one hand, palm up, fingers spread, the universal gesture of a woman who expects the world to hand things to her without effort. Boots. Let me see it. Naomi handed it over. Voss held the paper between two fingers. The way a person holds something they are worried might be contagious, studied it for exactly 3 seconds, and then looked up with an expression that had clearly already made its decision before she'd read a single letter on the page. Boots. This has to be a system glitch. There's no way this is legitimate. It's legitimate. I purchased it 6 days ago. Boots. With what? Voss said, and her voice dropped into a stage, whisper pitched precisely loud enough to be heard by the entire first-class cabin. Boots. Sweetheart, the bag you're carrying costs less than the champagne we pour up here. Those shoes wouldn't pass dress code at a gas station. Boots. A man in row 1 turned around fully now. 2 passengers across the aisle exchanged a look and said nothing. Boots. Nobody spoke. Nobody intervened. This is the part of the story that should make your stomach turn, and it should, because it is the truest part. Boots. 31 strangers watched a woman be humiliated in broad daylight over a seat she had paid for, and every single one of them found something else to look at. Boots. Watch this next detail. It matters later, more than you think it does right now. Voss was not finished. She leaned down close enough that only row 2 could hear her clearly, and her voice took on a false, honeyed patience, the tone people use right before they say something designed to cut. Boots. You people always do this, she said. You find one seat that's empty, you slide into it, and you act shocked when someone actually checks. Boots. I've seen it 100 times. I know exactly what this is. Then, louder again, back to performance volume for her audience of 31, she added, I have half a mind to have security meet this aircraft right now and save everyone the trouble. Boots. The man in 1A, Harold Bennett, finally spoke, though not to help. Maybe you should just move, he said to Naomi, not unkindly exactly, but with the weary irritation of a man who wanted his flight to leave on time more than he wanted justice done 3 rows behind him. Boots. It's not worth the argument. Nobody in that cabin corrected him. Nobody said her boarding pass was already valid, already proven, already sitting folded in Voss's own pocket. Boots. The silence of 31 people can be its own kind of violence, and this story is not going to pretend otherwise. Boots. Voss folded the boarding pass in half and slid it into her own uniform breast pocket. I'm going to hold on to this while we sort this out, she said. Boots. That's my property. Give it back. And this is my cabin, Voss said, stepping closer. Close enough that the perfume became something you could almost taste. Boots. I have a real passenger waiting who needs this seat. Someone who actually belongs up here. Not someone who wandered up from the back with a stolen boarding pass. Boots. Nobody had said the word stolen yet. Voss said it now, clearly, deliberately, loud enough for row 1 to hear it and start whispering. Boots. Something old and cold moved through Naomi's chest at that exact word. Stolen. It was the same word, the identical word that had ended her career the first time, spoken by the same mouth. Boots. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She reached into her bag with a hand that did not shake, pulled out her phone, and calmly began recording video, the screen angled up at Voss's face. Boots. I did not steal anything, she said. I'd like my boarding pass back, and I'd like you to step away from my seat. Boots. Voss's eyes flicked to the phone and something flickered across her face, gone in half a second, replaced by something harder. Boots. Put that away. You do not have permission to record crew members. That's a federal offense. It is not, and Voss knew it was not, and for one instant something like doubt crossed her expression before she buried it under something meaner. Boots. Grace Whitman in seat 2B lowered her magazine at last. She did not say anything out loud, but she quietly reached into her own bag, pulled out her phone, and began taking her own photographs of the boarding pass in Voss's pocket, of the confrontation, of the timestamp on the overhead display. Boots. She did it without looking up, the way a person does something they are afraid to be seen doing. Voss straightened her spine, turned on her heel, and marched to the front of the cabin, where the intercom for the flight deck sat mounted beside the galley curtain. Boots. She pressed the button. Captain, she said, we have a security situation in row 2. I need you back here. Boots. The cockpit door opened 40 seconds later, and Captain Wade Kessler stepped into the aisle, a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, with the particular walk of someone who has never once in his career had his authority questioned and does not intend to start now. Boots. Voss met him halfway and spoke into his ear, fast and low, her hand gesturing back toward 2A. Kessler's face hardened as he listened. Boots. He did not ask Naomi a single question. He did not ask to see the boarding pass Voss was still holding folded in her own pocket. Boots. He walked directly to row 2 and planted himself in the aisle, arms crossed. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and get off this aircraft. Boots. I have a valid boarding pass, Naomi said. Your flight attendant is holding it. Ask her to return it and check it against the manifest. Boots. I don't need to check anything. My crew has flagged you as a security concern, and that's all the authority I need. Boots. You have 30 seconds. This aircraft has not left the gate. There is no security concern. Kessler's jaw tightened. Boots. Behind him, Voss folded her arms and watched with an expression very close to satisfaction. The expression of a woman who has just successfully escalated a problem to someone with more authority than herself, confident the outcome will go exactly her way, because it always had before. Boots. Kessler leaned down, his voice dropping into something that was meant to sound reasonable, and instead sounded like a threat, wearing a reasonable voice as a costume. Boots. I can radio for law enforcement to meet this plane at the gate right now, or I can radio for an emergency diversion once we're in the air, and have you removed by federal marshals in Nashville. Boots. Either way, you're getting off my aircraft. Your choice how many people watch it happen. The cabin had gone completely silent by then. Boots. Even the flight attendants working the galley had stopped moving. Somewhere behind the curtain, a cartwheel squeaked once and then went still, and that small sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. Boots. Get your bags and get out of my cabin, Voss said again from beside him, her arms folded, her chin high, her pearl earrings catching the cabin lighting. Boots now. Before I have you removed in handcuffs. That is the sentence you heard at the very beginning of this story. Boots. Now you know what led up to it, and it should feel worse now than it did the first time, because now you know it was a lie built on top of an older lie, 16 years in the making, and nobody on that plane, not one person, had lifted a finger to stop it. Boots. Naomi looked at Kessler. She looked at Voss. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand up in a fury. Boots. She closed her laptop slowly, slid it into her bag, and reached up to touch her father's watch on her left wrist. Once, the way a person touches something for courage before they do something they have been dreading. Boots. Then Kessler reached down and closed his hand around her upper arm. He did not ask her to stand. He pulled. Boots. Naomi's shoulder wrenched hard against the seatbelt still buckled across her lap, and for one frozen half-second the entire cabin heard the sharp intake of her breath, the only sound she made. Boots. Grace Whitman's phone was still recording. Harold Bennett, the businessman in row 1, half rose out of his seat and then, visibly, made the choice not to finish rising, and sat back down and looked at his own hands. Boots. Naomi unbuckled herself before Kessler could tear the belt loose, stood and walked. She did not run. She did not shout. Boots. She picked up her bag from the overhead bin herself, before either of them could touch it, and she walked down 31 rows of a silence, so complete you could hear the recycled cabin air moving through the vents. Boots. Voss walked 2 steps behind her the entire way, arms still folded, chin still high, savoring it, the way a person savors a thing they have done many times before, and never once been made to answer for. Boots. Nobody in economy knew who she was. Nobody in first class knew who she was. Marcus Whitfield in row 3 watched her walk past him toward the exit, and he did not say a word because he understood, with the sharp instinct of a man who had built a company himself, that this was not his moment to speak. Boots. This was hers. At the jet bridge, a gate agent who had scanned Naomi's boarding pass 40 minutes earlier stood frozen, unsure what she was watching. Boots. Naomi stopped at the top of the bridge, turned, and for one single moment looked directly at Deborah Voss. "You should hold on to that boarding pass," Naomi said quietly. Boots. "You're going to need it later." Voss laughed, an actual laugh, short and sharp and entirely without warmth. "Sure thing," she said, and turned back toward the cabin, already smoothing her scarf, already moving on, because to Deborah Voss, this had already stopped mattering. Boots. It took 11 minutes. 11 minutes for Naomi to walk to the gate agent's counter, present her employee credentials, and ask, in a voice so calm, the gate agent would later tell her supervisor, it gave her chills, to be connected immediately to Ironwood's Charlotte station manager. Boots. It took another 6 minutes for the station manager to reach Renee Sadler, Ironwood's chief operating officer, who was already at her desk at company headquarters 12 miles away, and who, upon hearing 4 sentences of what had happened, went pale, stood up from her chair, and said the words that would end Deborah Voss's career before the aircraft had even pushed back from the gate. Boots. Ground the flight. Nobody moves until I get there. 17 minutes after Naomi Carter was dragged out of seat 2A, Captain Wade Kessler received a radio call instructing him to hold at the gate for an unscheduled operations delay. Boots. He had no idea why. Deborah Voss, refilling a champagne flute for the man in 1A, had no idea why either. Boots. She would find out in 9 minutes, and the finding out would be the beginning of the worst day of her professional life, though she did not yet know that, standing in that cabin, humming faintly to herself, utterly certain that whatever had just happened, she had been right to do it. Boots. Renee Sadler arrived at Gate B14 with Ironwood's general counsel, Diane Foster, a Charlotte police escort trailing 2 steps behind them, not for Naomi, but for what everyone in that terminal was about to learn. Boots. They walked up the jet bridge together, and the flight attendant working the door, a 24-year-old named Ashley Monroe who had joined Ironwood only 8 months earlier, opened it expecting a maintenance delay, and instead found her chief operating officer standing there with a face like a closed door. Boots. "Where is she?" Renee asked. "The other one." "She just left," Ashley said, confused. "The passenger from 2A. Boots. "She walked off about 20 minutes ago. Get Deborah Voss and Captain Kessler to the front of the cabin now." Boots. What Renee Sadler did next, she would later admit, she did partly out of instinct and partly out of a kind of fury she had never once felt in 11 years of working for Naomi Carter. Boots. She stepped fully into the cabin in front of every remaining passenger and spoke loudly enough that all 6 rows of first class heard every word. Boots. 20 minutes ago, your crew forcibly removed a woman from seat 2A. That woman's name is Naomi Carter. She is the founder, chief executive officer, and majority owner of this airline. Boots. She owns 54% of the company whose uniform you are both currently wearing. The cabin did not gasp, exactly. Boots. It did something quieter and worse. It went completely, absolutely still, the particular stillness of a room realizing, all at once, that it has watched something it cannot take back. Boots. Deborah Voss's face drained of color in stages, like a photograph developing in reverse. "That's not possible," she said, and her voice came out smaller than it had been all morning. Boots. "That's not, she doesn't look like what, Deborah?" Renee said, and let the question sit in the air. Boots. Voss opened her mouth and closed it. "This has to be a misunderstanding," she said finally. "I was following protocol." Boots. "I have 14 years of experience reading this cabin, and I made a judgment call based on..." "Based on what, exactly?" Diane Foster said, stepping forward with a small leather folder, already in her hand. Boots. "Because I have her boarding pass right here, retrieved from your uniform pocket by station security 4 minutes ago. Confirmed seat assignment, confirmed payment, Confirmed identity, matching the passenger manifest you were given this morning, which you signed for. Boots. Every piece of information you needed was already in your hand. You chose not to look at it. Captain Kessler had gone very quiet, the particular quiet of a man doing math on how much trouble he was actually in. Boots. I acted on information provided to me by my crew, he said. That's standard procedure. If she's who you say she is, this is a terrible mistake, and I'm sure we can. Boots. We can what? Renee said. Apologize? She's not on this aircraft anymore, Captain. She's in a car headed back to headquarters with a bruised shoulder and 16 years of history with your flight attendant that neither of you know anything about yet. Boots. That last sentence landed differently than the rest, and it should have, because it was the sentence that mattered most, though nobody in that cabin understood it yet. Boots. Deborah Voss certainly didn't. She stood there in her silk scarf and her pearl earrings, already rehearsing, in the back of her mind, the explanation she would give, the protocol she would cite, the 14 years of experience she would lean on, because Deborah Voss had never once, in her entire career, believed herself capable of being wrong. Boots. That certainty had carried her through every complaint quietly filed against her, and quietly closed without consequence. It was about to run headfirst into a woman who had spent 16 years building the exact kind of company that does not close complaints quietly anymore. Boots. At Ironwood headquarters, in a 12-story glass building, rising on the site of the old Palmetto Air Cargo Terminal, Naomi Carter sat in her office with an ice pack against her shoulder and a laptop open on her desk. Boots. She had not changed clothes. She had not called a lawyer for herself because she was the lawyer's boss. She pulled up the employee file for Deborah Voss, and what she found waiting there was worse than anything she had imagined on the drive back. Boots. 6 prior complaints, spanning 11 years, all filed by passengers, all involving some variation of the same accusation. Rude, dismissive, discriminatory treatment of passengers, Voss had personally decided did not belong in her cabin. Boots. Every single complaint had been logged, reviewed by a mid-level customer relations manager, and closed within 72 hours with the same boilerplate language. Boots. Insufficient evidence of policy violation. Boots. One complaint, filed 2 years earlier, involved a 17-year-old boy named Marcus Webb, flying alone to visit his grandmother, whom Voss had accused of sneaking into first class from economy, and had personally escorted by the arm back through the curtain in front of a full cabin, though his ticket, like Naomi's, had been entirely valid. Boots. That complaint had been closed in 61 hours. Naomi read that file twice. Then she picked up her phone and called Renee Sadler. Boots. Get me Gerald. No, get me Diane, and get me Marcus Whitfield's office, and get me every board member you can reach in the next hour. Boots. We're not handling this quietly. Boots. By 6 o'clock that evening, 9 people sat around the long walnut table in Ironwood's executive conference room on the 12th floor. Naomi, Renee, Diane Foster, 4 board members reachable on short notice, and joining by video from his own office 2 states away, Marcus Whitfield of Union Sky Airlines, who had asked, unprompted, to be included. Boots. Nobody had invited him. He had called Renee Sadler himself an hour after landing in Chicago and said 4 words that told her everything about the kind of partner Ironwood was about to merge with. Boots. I saw what happened. Naomi told the room the whole story, in order, without embellishment. The watch that was never stolen. Boots. The signed statement that ended her career at 26. The lawsuit. The auction. The airline she had built to be better than the one that broke her. Boots. And then this morning, 16 years later, sitting in a seat she had paid for on a plane she owned, watching the exact same woman do the exact same thing to her again, and finding out, from a personnel file she should never have had to open, that Voss had spent the 16 years in between doing it to other people, over and over, in a company that had let her. Boots. The room was silent when she finished. Renee spoke first. We terminate both of them tonight. Voss and Kessler. Gross misconduct, violation of federal anti-discrimination statute, violation of company policy on passenger treatment and use of force. Boots. Effective immediately. Do it, Naomi said. And the statement from 16 years ago, the one that got me fired from Palmetto, that's a separate matter now. Boots. Refer it to legal for a perjury review. If the statute allows it, I want it prosecuted. Diane Foster was already writing. Boots. And the 6 buried complaints. Someone in customer relations has been closing these without real review for over a decade. Boots. That's not one bad employee, Naomi. That's a systemic failure sitting inside my own company, and I did not know about it until today. Boots. Then we find out how deep it goes, Naomi said. I want an independent audit, outside investigators, not our own people marking their own homework. Boots. And I want it done publicly enough that nobody in this company ever again thinks a complaint like this gets quietly closed. Boots. Marcus Whitfield's voice came through the video screen, level and clear. For what it's worth, he said, this doesn't change anything about the deal on my end. Boots. If anything, it tells me exactly what kind of company I'm about to be part of, not the crew on that plane. Boots. Her. Within 72 hours, the consequences arrived in a cascade. Nobody could have stopped even if they had wanted to. Boots. Deborah Voss was terminated for cause that same night, before her flight had even completed its delayed departure to Chicago. Boots. She was escorted off the aircraft by Charlotte police, not arrested, simply removed, her company badge confiscated at the gate in front of the same first-class cabin that had watched her humiliate Naomi Carter 6 hours earlier. Boots. The Federal Aviation Administration opened an inquiry into her cabin crew certification within the week, citing a documented pattern of discriminatory conduct toward passengers, and 90 days later, that certification was formally revoked. Boots. Without it, Deborah Voss could never work as a flight attendant on a commercial aircraft again, for any airline, anywhere in the country, for the rest of her working life. Boots. Her attorney issued a statement calling the termination premature and the FAA's action disproportionate. No news outlet ran it above the fold. Boots. The story everyone wanted was not Deborah Voss's defense. It was Naomi Carter's face. Captain Wade Kessler was terminated the same night. Boots. The FAA opened a separate investigation into his conduct specifically, citing the threatened use of an emergency diversion as a coercive tool against a passenger, and the unauthorized physical removal of a ticketed passenger from her seat. Boots. His pilot's license was suspended pending review, and 8 months later, following the review, permanently revoked. His union filed a grievance on his behalf. Boots. It was denied in 9 days. He was last known to be working as a ground operations dispatcher for a regional freight carrier in Ohio. Boots. The Department of Transportation opened a formal investigation into Ironwood's complaint handling procedures. The exact audit Naomi herself had demanded before any regulator asked for one. Boots. She did not fight the investigation. She welcomed it. She released a public statement, 4 sentences long, written in her own hand and read on camera by no one but her. Boots. I built this airline to be better than the one that fired me. Today I learned it wasn't, not all the way through. Boots. That changes starting now. The statement spread faster than the cell phone video Grace Whitman had quietly recorded in seat 2B, which had already been picked up by 3 national news outlets within 36 hours. Boots. Naomi accepted exactly one interview request, a 12-minute sit-down with a national morning program, and told the full story on camera for the first time in her life. The false accusation at Palmetto Air, Deborah Voss's signature on a lie, the termination, the years of rebuilding from a folding table at a Waffle House to owning the runway she used to mop coffee spills off of, and the flight that brought all 16 years of it back into one cabin. Boots. She didn't recognize me, Naomi said on camera, her voice level, her hands still. 16 years later, sitting in a seat I paid for, on a plane I own, and she looked straight through me, because she never once saw me as a person. Boots. Not then, not now, not until someone with a title made her. The clip was shared 9 million times in 5 days. Boots. Marcus Whitfield called Naomi the morning after it aired. The Union Sky Board had met that same evening. The merger had not been canceled. Boots. It had been accelerated. Any CEO can run a company well when things are going right, Whitfield told her over the phone. Boots. I wanted to see how you'd handle it when something went wrong inside your own house. Now I know. The $2.6 billion deal was signed in Chicago on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks ahead of the original schedule, and Naomi wore the same oatmeal blouse she had worn on the flight, and her father's watch, and nothing else. Boots. On the same day the deal closed, Naomi signed 2 internal orders that mattered more to her than the merger itself. Boots. The first promoted Ashley Monroe, the 24-year-old flight attendant who had opened the cabin door for Renee Sadler that first terrible afternoon, to cabin service director, the exact position Deborah Voss had held for 14 years. Boots. Ashley was the youngest person in Ironwood's history to hold the title. When Renee handed her the letter, Ashley read it twice, looked up at Naomi, and said, "I won't let you down." Boots. "You already didn't," Naomi told her. "You took photos when nobody else in that cabin would even look up." The second order restructured Ironwood's entire passenger experience division from the ground up. Boots. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for every crew member, every quarter, no exceptions. Attendance tied directly to flight eligibility. Boots. A completely rebuilt complaint system, routed to an independent ombudsman's office with no reporting line back to the employees under review, so that no complaint could ever again be closed by the person with the most reason to bury it. Boots. Body cameras for all cabin crew during boarding and deplaning, and a single sentence written by Naomi herself, printed now on the first page of every crew manual in the company. Boots. Every person who boards this aircraft is somebody. Treat them that way every time, whether you think anyone is watching or not. Boots. 6 months later, Naomi Carter stood in the lobby of Ironwood's new 12-story headquarters, built on the exact plot of land where the old Palmetto Air Cargo Terminal once stood, the same lot where her father had parked his truck every single night for 29 years before walking inside to mop the floors nobody else wanted to touch. Boots. Renee had once asked her why she'd insisted on this particular piece of land when 3 cheaper lots were available across town. Boots. Naomi had told her the truth. Some ground remembers what happened on it. I want to remember too. Boots. On the wall behind the reception desk hung a framed photograph of Elijah Carter in his gray janitor's uniform, standing in front of Terminal C with a mop in one hand and a battered metal lunch pail in the other, taken by a coworker on a disposable camera sometime in the early 90s. Boots. Beneath the photograph, a brass plaque read, "Elijah Carter, 1954 to 2021. He cleaned these floors so his daughter could own the sky." Boots. Naomi touched the corner of that frame every single morning on her way to the elevator. She touched it that morning too. Boots. On the 3rd floor, the new independent ombudsman's office was fully staffed. 3 investigators, a case manager, and a direct line to Naomi's desk that she checked personally, twice a week. Boots. In 6 months, it had processed 53 complaints. 49 had been resolved within 2 weeks. 4 had led to termination. Boots. Not one had been closed without a full outside review. Every crew member, every pilot, every gate agent at Ironwood had completed quarterly anti-discrimination training on time, without exception, because Naomi had made the consequence simple and absolute. Boots. You don't fly if you don't show up. Boots. Ashley Monroe, 3 months into her new title, had launched a mentorship program of her own design called First Day, First Class, in which every new hire spent their very first training flight seated in the premium cabin, regardless of what job they had been hired for, so that no one, from the newest baggage handler to the newest pilot, would ever again forget what it felt like to belong somewhere before someone tried to tell them they didn't. Boots. Naomi kept a handwritten letter from Ashley in her top desk drawer, next to a folded copy of her father's obituary. Boots. It said, "You asked me to walk with you that day. I'm still walking. Thank you for not giving up on this place or on me." Boots. The Union-Sky merger closed exactly on schedule. Ironwood Union was now the 4th largest airline in the United States. Marcus Whitfield sat on the combined board, and he never once told the story of that flight without ending it the same way. Boots. That was the moment I knew who I was actually doing business with. Deborah Voss's case went to federal court 11 months after that flight. Boots. Perjury for the false witness statement she had signed 16 years earlier, the one that had ended a 26-year-old woman's career over a watch that was never stolen. Boots. Civil rights violations for the documented pattern of discriminatory conduct against passengers, including 17-year-old Marcus Webb, who testified, now a college sophomore, about being marched out of first class in front of a full cabin 2 years before Naomi ever set foot on that airplane. Boots. The trial lasted 11 days. Her attorney argued standard crew discretion and professional judgment, the same defense Deborah Voss had leaned on her entire career, the defense that had let her get away with it for 14 years. Boots. The jury did not buy it. Liable on every count, $260,000 in damages. A 5-year ban from any federally regulated transportation position. Boots. 240 hours of community service at a civil rights resource center in Charlotte, the same kind of center that had once, 16 years ago, offered Naomi Carter a free consultation she couldn't afford to take further than one meeting. Boots. Deborah Voss walked out of the federal courthouse in a plain gray blazer. No scarf, no pearls, no Rolex on her wrist. Boots. The cameras caught her face on the courthouse steps, and for the first time in this entire story, it was not a face full of certainty. Boots. It was blank and hollow and stripped of every single prop she had used, for 14 years, to feel like she was the one who got to decide who belonged in a room. Boots. Here is the part of the story most people never get to see, because it happened quietly 90 days into her community service in a small meeting room at that civil rights center, where Deborah Voss sat once a week now, filing paperwork and answering phones for people whose flights had been overbooked and whose complaints had, for years, gone exactly nowhere. Boots. A woman came in one Tuesday afternoon with her elderly mother, trying to file a discrimination complaint against a different airline entirely, frustrated, near tears, certain nobody was going to listen to her either. Boots. And Deborah Voss, for the first time in 14 years of standing over people in a first-class cabin deciding what they deserved, sat down across from a stranger, looked her directly in the eye, and actually listened. Boots, all the way through, without once glancing at what the woman was wearing. She wrote a letter after that, not because a lawyer told her to, not because it would help her case, since her case was already over. Boots. She mailed it to Ironwood's headquarters, addressed to Naomi Carter personally. It was 3 paragraphs long. It did not ask for forgiveness, and it did not make excuses the way every previous statement of hers had. Boots. It said only this: I spent 14 years telling myself I was protecting a standard. I was never protecting anything. Boots. I was just deciding, over and over, who got to be seen, and I was wrong every single time, including the first time, 16 years ago, when I was wrong about you. Boots. I don't expect you to read this twice. I needed to write it once. Naomi read it once. She did not respond. Boots. She did not need to. She put it in the same drawer as her father's obituary and Ashley's letter, not because it undid anything, but because a story about who gets to be seen should probably remember the moment, even a small and late one, when somebody finally understood what they had taken from other people. Boots. Naomi did not celebrate either verdict, the one against Deborah Voss or the one against Wade Kessler, whose pilot's license was gone for good by then, who was last reported dispatching freight trucks in a gravel lot outside Toledo. Boots. She read both rulings alone in her office with the door closed, and when she finished, she looked at her father's photograph on the wall outside, the way she did every morning, and she thought about how little Elijah Carter had ever asked for in 29 years of mopping floors. Nobody thanked him for. Boots. A steady job, a safe drive home, a daughter who didn't quit when the world told her to. She hadn't quit. Boots. She picked up her phone and called Renee. Book me on Flight 74 tomorrow, she said. Economy, window seat, are you sure? Renee asked. Boots. I want to see how Ashley runs her cabin, Naomi said and hung up, and looked down at her father's watch, the second hand moving the way it always had, steady, patient, and forward, the same as it had moved through every year. She had spent rebuilding a life that a lie had once tried to take away from her. Boots. Have you ever been judged before a single person in the room knew your name? Have you ever walked somewhere and felt every eye in the room decide who you were, before you'd said a single word? Boots. If you have, you already know the weight of what happened in that cabin, and you already know why it mattered so much that somebody finally refused to let it be closed quietly. Boots. If this story reached something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized somebody in it, share it with them. Boots. Somebody in your life needs to be reminded today that they are not invisible, no matter how many people have looked straight through them. Boots. And tell me in the comments, honestly, if you've ever stood in that cabin yourself. Which row were you in? I read every single one.